My name is Martha Wilson. I'm 67 years old, and on Mother's Day, my only daughter sent me a live snake in a box. Her cruelty was meant to break me, but instead, it led me to a lawyer's office. And now she's not only disinherited, but she'll never be able to touch a penny of my money or manipulate my grandchildren again. I know my story might sound unbelievable, but every word is true. I'm sharing this now because I feel like someone out there needs to hear it. Before we begin, I'd love to know where you're all listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. It makes me feel a little less alone knowing we're all connected, even across the miles. Let me know in the comments. Okay, let's go back to the beginning. It didn't start with the snake. It started, as these things often do, with a quiet Sunday dinner that tasted like ash. The scent of roasted chicken and rosemary, a smell that had meant home and family for over 40 years, filled our small dining room. It was a scent I once associated with laughter and the clatter of silverware as my daughter, Vanessa, told us about her week. Now it just felt like the prelude to a performance. My husband, Robert, sat at the head of the table, his kind eyes clouded with a weariness that had become their permanent state. Across from me, Vanessa at 42, still beautiful, but with a hardness around her mouth that hadn't been there 10 years ago, pushed a single green bean around her plate. Her husband, Greg, sat beside her, already on his second helping, shoveling food into his mouth with a gusto that never translated to finding, let alone keeping, a job. For years, this Sunday dinner had been our ritual, a non-negotiable point of connection in our busy lives. But lately, it felt less like a tradition and more like a weekly tribunal, where Robert and I were the silent defendants. The air was thick with unspoken demands, heavy with the weight of their perpetual dissatisfaction. "Heard from Jim and Susan today," Greg said, his mouth full of mashed potatoes. He wiped his chin with the back of his hand, a gesture that always made my skin crawl. "They just got back from their cruise, the big one, Alaska, said it was incredible." I arranged my features into a weak smile. "Oh, that's lovely. I've always wanted to see the glaciers. Maybe one day." Vanessa let out a short, bitter laugh, a sound like ice cracking. Must be nice, having parents who actually want you to have nice things. Susan said her dad co-signed on their new house. Didn't just co-sign, he gave them the whole down payment. Just gave it to them. Because he loves them. She shot a pointed look at me, her blue eyes, so like mine in color, but so different in spirit, cold and accusing. Here it comes, I thought. The familiar ache started in my chest, a dull pressure behind my ribs. Robert reached for my hand under the table, his warm, steady grip, a silent, desperate message. "I'm here. We're in this together. Stay calm." "We've always helped you, honey," I said, my voice a carefully constructed wall of even tones. "Helped?" Greg snorted, a spray of food escaping his lips. "That's not helping, Martha. That's crisis management. That's just keeping our heads barely above water so you don't have to be embarrassed. We have opportunities, big ones, but you need capital to make capital." I knew what opportunities meant. For Greg, it was another sure-thing poker tournament in Atlantic City or a can't-miss stock tip from a guy at a bar who probably lived in his mother's basement. For Vanessa, it was a new line of designer handbags she felt she needed to maintain her image among friends who had no idea she was drowning in credit card debt. My husband and I had worked our entire lives, me as a school administrator navigating budgets and bureaucracy, Robert as an engineer designing bridges that would outlive us all. We had a comfortable but not extravagant salary. We saved, we invested in mutual funds, not pipe dreams. We'd been responsible. We had sacrificed our own cruises and fancy renovations to pay for their emergencies, which seemed to happen with the alarming frequency of seasons changing. "You're talking about my inheritance, Mother," Vanessa said, her voice dropping to a low, intense whisper that was more menacing than a shout.
It's just sitting there in your accounts, collecting dust. It's not doing anyone any good. We need it now. I'm entitled to it." The word entitled hung in the air, ugly and sharp. It was a word I had never used with my own parents, who had scrimped and saved to give me a better life. I looked at my daughter, at the woman she had become. The sweet girl who used to make me dandelion bouquets and write me poems with misspelled words was gone, replaced by this stranger with hard eyes and a grasping heart. "We've always helped you, Guy," Robert said, his voice firm but laced with a deep paternal patience that I knew was wearing thin. "That money is our security for our retirement, for our health care should we need it. We don't know what the future holds." "Oh, I think I do," Greg muttered, not quite under his breath, but just loud enough for the poison to land. "You're not getting any younger." A chill, sharp and distinct, went down my spine. It wasn't just a rude comment. It was a threat veiled in actuarial observation. It was the sound of someone waiting for you to die, checking their watch. He was talking about my funeral as if it were a future payout on an investment. "That's enough," I said, my voice shaking slightly despite my best efforts. "That is quite enough, Greg." Vanessa slammed her fork down on her plate. The sharp clang made me flinch. "Enough? No, it's not enough. You sit on all this money, hoarding it like some dragon, while your own daughter struggles. What kind of mother does that? My friends, their parents help them. They want to see their children happy. All you care about is your precious nest egg." She stood up so quickly her chair scraped against the hardwood floor with a violent shriek. Her face was flushed, her chest heaving. "Fine," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "Fine, but don't you dare call me asking to see Lily and Noah. You don't get to be a grandmother if you can't even be a mother. You'll have your money, but you'll be alone. See how you like that." Greg grabbed her arm, a triumphant smirk on his face, and they stormed out, slamming the front door so hard a picture frame in the hallway fell to the floor. The house fell silent, the only sound my own ragged breathing and the frantic thumping of my heart. I stared at the mess on the wall, the greasy smear of gravy, the shattered plate representing my shattered heart. But underneath the pain, a new feeling was taking root. It was cold, hard, and terrifyingly clear. It was resolve.
That night, long after Robert and I had meticulously cleaned up the last shard of porcelain, I couldn't sleep. I went downstairs and sat at the kitchen table where my daughter had just accused me of a lifetime of neglect. I thought about Greg's words. "You're not getting any younger." I thought about Vanessa's threat to withhold my grandchildren, a threat that felt like a knife being twisted in my soul. This wasn't a family squabble anymore. This was dangerous. This was extortion. I walked over to my desk, the old oak one that had been my father's, and opened a drawer. I took out a fresh, empty notebook. On the first page, I wrote the date. Then I wrote down everything that had happened at dinner. Every word, every threat, every nuance of their contempt. It wasn't a plan for revenge. Not yet. It was an act of survival. I was creating a record, a testament. I was preparing for a war I never wanted to fight. And as I wrote, the ink flowing like a dark premonition, I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that this was only the beginning. The next day, I went to the drugstore and bought a simple, black hardcover notebook, the kind a student might use for class, with a sewn-in binding that couldn't be easily tampered with. It felt clandestine, almost shameful to be hiding a purchase, tucking it into the bottom of my grocery bag beneath a bag of apples and a carton of milk. My heart thumped a little too fast as I paid the cashier, a young girl who gave me a cheerful smile. I felt like a spy in my own life, a criminal gathering evidence against her own flesh and blood. Back home, I found the perfect hiding place, an old hat box in the back of my closet, tucked behind a stack of winter sweaters. The box was filled with old photographs, me and Robert on our wedding day, Vanessa as a gap-toothed 7-year-old, family vacations at the shore.
Placing the stark, empty journal among those smiling ghosts of the past felt like a desecration. Each night, after Robert's breathing had settled into the deep, steady rhythm of sleep, I would slip out of bed. The ritual became my secret penance. I'd sit at the dimly lit kitchen table, the silence of the house pressing in on me, and I would write. My hand trembled as I filled the first few pages. I documented the dinner, the shattered plate, the threats in meticulous detail. Then I started going backward in time, my memory jogging with a painful, startling clarity. It was like opening a Pandora's box of past concessions and capitulations. I listed the big things first, the 5-figure wounds. I dedicated a full page to the $15,000 I'd given them 3 years ago. I remembered the phone call as if it were yesterday. Vanessa sobbing hysterically. Greg had gotten into trouble with some bad people over a poker game. They were making threats. They needed the money by morning. I remembered the frantic drive to the bank, the sick feeling in my stomach as I signed the cashiered check, and the way Greg had snatched it from my hand without a word of thanks, his eyes shifty and desperate. They swore it was a loan, that they'd pay back every penny with interest once Greg's new venture paid off. The venture never did, and the loan was never mentioned again. Then there was the $5,000 for back rent last year. The eviction notice had already been posted on their door. I remember going to their apartment, the smell of stale cigarettes and desperation in the air. Lily and Noah were there, watching cartoons, oblivious to the fact that their world was about to be upended. I wrote the check directly to the landlord, my hand shaking with a mixture of anger and pity. Vanessa had hugged me then, burying her face in my shoulder. "You saved us, Mom," she'd whispered. A week later, I saw a picture she posted on Facebook of a new, expensive-looking watch on her wrist. I went online, my fingers clicking hesitantly on the keyboard. I logged into my bank account and started scrolling back, month by month, year by year. I printed out the old statements, the paper warm from the printer. With a yellow highlighter, I marked the transfers, the bailouts, the countless smaller sums, $500 here for a car repair, $300 there for a dental bill, $1,000 for a can't-miss promotion for Greg that required a new wardrobe he never got to wear because the job mysteriously fell through. I stapled the receipts and statements into the back of the notebook. The hat box in my closet grew heavier. Not just with paper, but with the tangible weight of my disillusionment. It was a ledger of my own foolishness, a testament to my blind hope. One evening, Robert came downstairs for a glass of water and found me at the table, surrounded by a sea of paper. I froze, my first instinct to sweep everything into a pile and hide it, like a guilty child. He didn't say a word. He just gently took the notebook from my hands and began to read the last entry I'd written. His face, usually so gentle and quick to smile, hardened into a mask of cold fury. "Martha," he said, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite place. Anger? Sadness? Regret? "I feel so ashamed, Robert," I whispered, the hot sting of tears finally welling in my eyes, blurring the neat columns of figures. "I'm feeling like I'm building a case against my own child. What kind of mother does that?" He knelt beside my chair, his knees cracking softly in the quiet kitchen, and he took my hands in his palms rough and calloused, but his touch infinitely gentle. "A smart one," he said fiercely, his eyes locking onto mine. "You are not being cruel. You are being careful. You have nothing to be ashamed of. I'm with you every step of the way." His support was the bedrock that allowed me to keep going, but I still craved a woman's perspective, a friend's validation. And that's when I made my first and perhaps most foolish mistake of this new chapter. I confided in Carol. Carol was my next-door neighbor. We'd lived side by side for 20 years, sharing cups of sugar, gardening tips, and stories over the backyard fence. She was recently widowed, and we'd bonded in our shared quiet grief. She always seemed so sympathetic, her eyes wide with concern whenever I'd hint at my troubles with Vanessa. One afternoon, while we were both on our knees in our respective flower beds, the dam broke. I told her about the dinner, about my fears for the future. I didn't tell her about the journal. That felt too much like a betrayal. But I told her enough. "Oh, you poor thing," she said, patting my arm, her touch surprisingly cool. "That's just awful. But you know how kids are these days. They're under so much pressure to keep up. Maybe she doesn't mean it. She probably feels so inadequate, with you and Robert being so successful and responsible." Her words were meant to sound soothing, but they felt like tiny, sharp barbs. They subtly, skillfully shifted the blame back to me. "Maybe she just needs to feel more independent," Carol continued, her head tilted in a gesture of faux wisdom. "Sometimes holding on too tight to the purse strings just makes them pull away harder. Is it possible she feels controlled by the money?" I went back into my house feeling worse than before, a seed of doubt planted in my mind. Was I the one in the wrong? Was I the cold, controlling mother my daughter accused me of being? I wouldn't find the truth until much later, but that very evening, after patting my arm with sympathy, Carol picked up the phone. She didn't call a friend to gossip. She called Greg. Carol, my sympathetic neighbor, was her second cousin, a fact she had conveniently omitted for 20 decades. She'd been a spy in my camp for years, feeding them information, twisting my worried words, validating their sense of victimhood, and encouraging their entitlement. Every worried confidence I had shared with her over a cup of tea had been weaponized and used against me. A week later, Vanessa called. Her voice was syrupy sweet, a tone I had come to dread. "Hi, Mommy. I'm so sorry about the other night. I was just so stressed out. I miss you. The kids miss you terribly."
My heart, that foolish, stubborn organ, so desperate for a truce, leaped with a flicker of hope. Maybe Carol was right. Maybe I had been too hard on her. "I miss you too, honey," I said, my voice soft. "Listen," she went on, the sweetness turning purposeful. "I know things are tight, but Lily's birthday is coming up, and there's this amazing party place she's desperate to have it at. It's a little pricey, but for my baby girl, I just want to give her the world." And there it was, the cycle, starting again. The apology was just a preface to the request. The emotional manipulation was the tool to get to my wallet. "I'll have to think about it, Vanessa," I said, my voice flat, the hope in my chest dying as quickly as it had sparked. "Think about it?" Her tone sharpened instantly, the sweetness vanishing. "What is there to think about? It's for your granddaughter. Or is your precious retirement more important than her happiness?" The line went dead. The hope in my chest curdled into a cold, hard knot. I walked to my closet, pulled out the hat box, and opened my journal. I documented the call, word for word. I was no longer just recording the past, I was now chronicling an active campaign of psychological warfare, and I had a terrible feeling that my daughter was just getting started. The worst, I knew with a chilling certainty, was yet to come. Spring arrived, painting our neighborhood in the soft, hopeful pastels of dogwood and cherry blossoms. It was a season of renewal, but I felt none of it. I moved through my days in a gray fog of anxiety, the journal in my closet growing thicker each week. Vanessa and I were in a Cold War, a tense standoff punctuated by occasional text messages from her that were either dripping with saccharine sweetness, "Thinking of you, Mommy," or sharp with bitter accusations. "I guess you've decided money is more important than your own grandchildren." I hadn't seen Lily or Noah in over a month, not since the disastrous dinner. The threat of losing them, of them being used as pawns in this ugly game of emotional chess, was a constant throbbing ache in the center of my chest. Every time I saw a child their age at the grocery store, my heart would clench with a painful longing. Then came Mother's Day. Robert, my dear, sweet Robert, tried his best. He made me breakfast in bed, pancakes with fresh strawberries, my favorite. He'd bought me a beautiful orchid.
He was trying so hard to make the day special, to fill the cavernous void left by our daughter's calculated silence. We spent the morning gardening, the warm May sun on our backs, a small fleeting comfort. I was almost starting to relax, to believe the day might pass without incident, without a fresh wound being inflicted. That was my second and most profound mistake. Around noon, a generic white delivery truck, not UPS or FedEx, pulled up to the curb. A man in a plain brown uniform, looking bored and tired, walked up our driveway carrying a plain cardboard box, about the size of a shoebox. He handed it to me. "For Martha Wilson," he grunted, before turning on his heel and leaving without another word. There was no return address, just my name and address, printed on a stark white label from a label maker. It looked cold and impersonal. "Who's that from?" Robert asked, wiping dirt from his hands on his jeans as he walked over from the rose bushes. "I have no idea," I said, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. Anonymous packages were not something we ever received. I carried it into the kitchen and placed it on the granite island, staring at it as if it might explode. Robert followed, his brow furrowed in concern. He leaned closer to the box. "He's that odd," he said, pointing a dirt-stained finger. "Look, there are holes punched in the side, small ones, but they're definitely breathing holes." My blood ran cold. I stared at the small, perfectly spaced holes. They were neat, deliberate. Why would a package need breathing holes? My mind flashed with a dozen horrifying, irrational possibilities. Robert, ever the engineer, ever the pragmatist, put his ear to the box. He snatched his head back as if he'd been burned, his eyes wide with alarm. "Martha," he whispered, his face suddenly pale under his sun-weathered skin. "I hear something, a scratching sound, a rustling, and I swear I just heard a hiss." Panic, cold and sharp and absolute, seized me. For a second, I was paralyzed, my feet rooted to the kitchen floor. My mind was a maelstrom of fear. But then something else took over. The weeks of quiet preparation, of documenting and steeling myself, had forged something new inside me. The part of me that had been a victim for so long, the part that would have cried or screamed, was silenced by the part that was now, reluctantly, a fighter. Instead of screaming, I took a deliberate step back from the counter. I pulled out my cell phone. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely unlock the screen, but my voice when I spoke was surprisingly steady. "Robert, stand back. I'm calling 911. While I was on the phone with the dispatcher, calmly explaining the situation, trying to sound like a rational woman and not a hysterical one, I had Robert do something else. "Get your own phone," I instructed him, my voice low and urgent, "and record this. All of it. I want a record of everything that happens from this moment on." He understood immediately. He fumbled with his phone for a second, then held it up, his hand shaking almost as much as mine. His video would later capture the box sitting ominously on the counter, the fear etched on our faces, everything. Within 10 minutes, a police car, its lights off but its presence deeply official, was parked in our driveway. A tall, serious-looking officer named Miller introduced himself. He had a kind face but wary eyes. He listened patiently as I explained the situation, my voice never wavering. He examined the box from a distance, his hand resting near his sidearm. "He did the right thing by calling, ma'am," he said gravely. "We're not going to open it here. I've called animal control. They'll be here any minute. Best to let the experts handle it." The waiting was agonizing. The three of us stood in my kitchen staring at the cardboard box. It just sat there, a silent, menacing presence in the heart of my home, a Trojan horse delivered on a day meant to celebrate motherhood. When the animal control officer arrived, a no-nonsense woman with thick leather gloves and a long metal pole with a loop at the end, she handled the situation with a professional calm that I envied. She carefully slit the tape on the box with a utility knife and tilted it open. A blur of orange and red slithered out onto my pristine kitchen counter. It was a snake, a corn snake, she later told us. Technically harmless, but clearly chosen and delivered for one purpose, to invoke sheer primal terror. Officer Miller took notes, his expression grim and tight-lipped. "Do you have any idea who would send this to you, ma'am?"
he asked, his voice now stripped of its earlier professional distance. It was the voice of a man who was now dealing with a crime. I looked him straight in the eye, my own fear momentarily eclipsed by a cold, hard certainty. "I have won," I said. After they had safely contained the snake and left, after the official reports had been filed and the quiet of a Sunday afternoon had descended on our home once more, the adrenaline began to wear off, leaving me trembling uncontrollably. Robert wrapped his arms around me, holding me tight as I shook. "It's over, Martha. It's okay." But it wasn't over. It was a declaration of war, an act of such deliberate, calculated cruelty, on Mother's Day of all days, that it severed the last frayed thread of hope I had for my daughter. This was not a cry for help. This was an act of terrorism. Later that evening, fueled by a cold rage that burned away my grief, I sat down at my computer. I wasn't just guessing that Vanessa was behind this. I needed proof. I needed the nail for her coffin. I logged into my credit card account, the one that Vanessa was still an authorized user on, a detail that I had deliberately, strategically left unchanged, hoping her arrogance would make her careless.
And there it was. My eyes scanned the list of recent transactions, and then I saw it, dated 3 weeks prior, a charge for $79.99. The merchant's name made my stomach turn, a physical lurch of disgust and validation. Reptile Palace. She had used my own money to buy the weapon to terrorize me. She was so arrogant, so certain of my passivity and my supposed stupidity that she didn't even bother to cover her tracks. It was the most hateful and also the most self-incriminating thing she could have possibly done. I took a screenshot of the transaction. I printed it out in triplicate. I walked to the closet, pulled out the hat box, and opened my journal. I stapled one copy of the screenshot to a new, clean page. Underneath it, I wrote in firm block letters, "Mother's Day. She sent a snake. Paid for with my card." I looked at the growing pile of evidence. The journal was no longer just a record of my anxiety. It was an indictment. It was a weapon, and I finally knew, with absolute, unshakable certainty, how I was going to use it. The next call I made wouldn't be to my daughter to scream or cry. It would be to the best damn lawyer I could find. The game had changed, and I was finally ready to play. I listened, mesmerized. She wasn't just offering legal advice, she was handing me a blueprint for freedom. She was building a fortress around me, brick by legal brick, each one mortared with the evidence I had so painstakingly gathered. What about what about Vanessa? I asked, my voice small, the last flicker of a mother's foolish heart. Margaret's expression softened for the first time, a brief glimpse of the woman behind the lawyer. My job is to protect you, Martha, my client. Your daughter is a grown woman who has made her choices repeatedly and destructively. Now, you are making yours. We left her office an hour later. The heavy tote bag I had carried in felt light as a feather on the way out. I wasn't just Martha Wilson, the long-suffering mother anymore. I was Margaret Summers' client. A sense of power, clean and sharp and unfamiliar, settled over me. I had laid the first brick of my fortress, and I knew, with every fiber of my being, that my daughter would soon come crashing against its walls. For a few weeks, there was silence. It was a strange, unnerving quiet, like the stillness in the air before a tornado. After our visit to the bank, where we systematically changed every password, PIN, and security question, I waited for the inevitable explosion. I expected a furious phone call, a pounding on the door when Vanessa's card was declined at her favorite boutique, but there was nothing. It was the calm before a storm I knew was brewing just over the horizon, a storm they were planning with care. The first gust of wind came not as a shout, but as a notification on my phone, a quiet ping that signaled the opening of a new front in this war. I had joined Facebook years ago, mostly to see pictures of Lily and Noah growing up. I rarely posted, preferring to be a quiet observer, but I would scroll through, feeling a distant, curated connection to my daughter's life. One evening, as Robert and I were watching the news, I opened the app out of habit. A new post from Vanessa was at the top of my feed. It was a long block of text, accompanied by a soft focus, professionally taken photograph of her and the kids, all of them wearing white, looking angelic and serene. There was no name mentioned, but I was the ghost, haunting every carefully crafted sentence. Feeling so heartbroken tonight. It's so hard when you try your best, when you love with your whole heart, but the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally use their power and money to control you. I've always taught my children that family is everything, but what do you do when a family member, especially an older one who you worry is not in their right mind, decides to cut you out of their life simply because you won't bend to their will? It's a special kind of pain to be treated like a stranger by your own mother. Please send prayers and positive vibes for my little family as we navigate this difficult manufactured crisis. We need all the strength we can get. I read it once, then twice. My hands started to shake so violently the phone clattered against the arm of the chair. Not in their right mind. Manufactured crisis. She was painting me as a cruel, senile old woman who was emotionally abusing her. She was twisting the narrative, seizing control of the story, and broadcasting it to her hundreds of friends and our extended family, many of whom were also my friends and family. Robert came into the room and saw my face. He took the phone from my trembling hand and read the post over my shoulder, his expression darkening with every word. That little... he began, his voice a low growl of disbelief and fury. The comments started rolling in, a cascade of digital sympathy, each one a small stab to my heart. "You are so strong, V, sending love and light your way," from one of her perfectly coiffed friends. "I'm so sorry you are going through this. Some parents are just toxic. You have to protect your peace," from a stranger who knew nothing. "This sounds awful. Is everything okay? Call me," from my own cousin Linda, who hadn't bothered to call me first to hear my side. It was a masterful performance of public victimhood. She had cast herself as the loving daughter and martyred mother, and me as the unhinged, wealthy villain. The restraining order hadn't been served yet. Margaret wanted to wait for the perfect moment, to let them expose themselves fully. In the meantime, Vanessa was using the information vacuum to launch a brilliant, vicious preemptive strike. The next day, the phone started ringing. It was my sister, Jean. Her voice was laced with a worried, pitying tone that made my blood boil. "Martha, what on earth is going on? I just saw Vanessa's post. She's telling everyone you've completely cut you off. Greg called Bill last night and said you're not well, that you're being influenced by Robert to hoard your money. She sent me a snake in the mail," I said, my voice tight, the words tasting like acid. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "A snake? Oh, Martha, that sounds so dramatic. Are you sure you're not exaggerating just a little? Vanessa told Linda it was just a silly prank that you took the wrong way because you've been so stressed lately." A silly prank. They had already spun the story, minimizing their cruelty, maximizing my supposed instability. My reality was being questioned, dismantled piece by piece by the people who should have known me best. I even got a call from a distant relative, a second cousin I hadn't seen in years, who was going through a messy divorce. "I saw Vanessa's post and my heart just broke for her," she said, her voice full of misplaced sympathy. "I know what it's like to have your family turn on you. It's almost as bad as what I'm going through with my ex." The smear campaign was working. I started to feel a creeping sense of shame and isolation. When I went to the grocery store, I imagined people were whispering about me in the aisles. Was I the monster they were making me out to be? The weight of their judgment, real or imagined, pressed down on me, heavy and suffocating. For a few terrifying days, my resolve wavered. I started to doubt myself. Maybe I should just give in. Give them the money, buy a fragile, expensive piece, and stop this public humiliation. The lowest point came when Greg escalated things from the digital world to the real one. He knew Robert and I took a walk around the neighborhood every evening at 7 p.m., a ritual we'd kept for 30 years. One night, as we rounded the corner onto our street, we saw him. He was standing on the lawn of our neighbor 2 doors down, talking to a small group of them. He saw us, and instead of leaving or looking away in shame, he raised his voice, making sure we could hear every poisonous word. "And we're just worried, you know," he said, his voice oozing fake concern, a performance for the neighbors. "Her memory's not what it used to be. She's getting paranoid, making wild accusations. We think she needs help, but she's shut us completely out. It's breaking Vanessa's heart." My face burned with a humiliation so intense it felt like a physical blow. I wanted to turn and run, to hide inside my house and never come out. Robert squeezed my hand, his grip like iron. "Keep walking, Martha," he whispered fiercely, his eyes fixed straight ahead. "Don't you dare let him see you crumble. Chin up, shoulders back." We walked past them, a gauntlet of curious and pitying stares. My gaze was fixed on my own front door, my heart hammering against my ribs. I could feel their eyes on my back. I could almost hear them thinking, "Poor Martha, she's really losing it." That night, I sat with my journal, but I couldn't write. The public shaming had hit a nerve that the private cruelty hadn't. Vanessa and Greg weren't just trying to get my money. They were trying to destroy my reputation, my relationships, my very identity. They were trying to erase me and replace me with the caricature of a crazy old woman they had created online. It was a strategic, insidious form of elder abuse. I looked at Robert, my eyes swimming with tears I refused to let fall.
Maybe they've won, I whispered, the words tasting like defeat.
He took the phone, his face set like stone. "No," he said, his voice quiet but absolute. "They haven't won. They've just given our lawyer more ammunition." He opened his own laptop and started taking screenshots of every post, every comment, every lie. He was building our counteroffensive. But I knew this was a new, more dangerous phase of the war. They weren't just fighting for money anymore. They were fighting to control the truth. And I was afraid that in the court of public opinion, a place where nuance dies and sensationalism thrives, I was already losing. The weight of the public smear campaign was crushing. For 2 days, I barely left the house. The ringing of the phone made me jump, and every ping of a new notification on my computer felt like a fresh assault. The doubt was a poison seeping into the foundations of the fortress I was trying to build. Was I strong enough to withstand a public siege? What if they succeeded in convincing a judge I was incompetent? The fear was a cold, constant companion. On the third day, when I was at my lowest, sitting in my kitchen and staring blankly at a wall, Robert put a cup of tea in my hands and the phone to my ear. "You need to talk to Brenda," he said simply. Brenda has been my best friend for 45 years. We were maids of honor at each other's weddings. We raised our children together, our houses just a few blocks apart before she and her husband retired and moved 3 states away. Our friendship has never wavered. She is the most no-nonsense, clear-eyed, fiercely loyal person I know. I poured my heart out to her, my voice cracking as I told her about the Facebook posts, the phone calls from confused relatives, the whispers in the neighborhood. I told her about Greg's performance on the neighbor's lawn. I confessed my deepest fear, that I was losing, that they had successfully painted me as a monster. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, and then Brenda's voice came through, sharp and clear as a bell, a voice that had talked me through everything from teenage heartbreak to the terror of a bad mammogram. "Martha Wilson, you listen to me right now," she said, and her tone immediately straightened my spine. "Do you hear what you're saying? You're letting a narcissistic, manipulative child and her worthless, grifting husband win with a few nasty posts on the internet? Get a grip." "But Brenda, you don't understand," I started, the familiar refrain of the victim. "Everyone thinks I'm a monster." "Who is everyone?" she shot back, her voice laced with impatience. "A handful of their spineless friends who probably owe them money? A few busy-bodied relatives who thrive on drama and never liked you anyway? That's not everyone. That's a focus group of fools. You know what they're doing, don't you? This is classic abuser behavior. It's a textbook case of DARVO, deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. They are the offenders, but they are screaming that they are the victims. It's a tantrum, Martha, a calculated public tantrum because you finally took away their favorite toy, your bank account." Her words cut through the fog of my self-pity like a laser. DARVO. The term was clinical, cold, and it perfectly, chillingly described what was happening. It gave a name to the chaos, and in naming it, it took away some of its power. "They are doing this because your plan is working," Brenda continued, her voice relentless, a verbal shaking. "They're panicking. They're lies of proof that you are winning. A few years ago, my own nephew tried to pull something similar with his mother, my sister, claimed she was getting forgetful and tried to get power of attorney. It's a classic move for greedy, entitled children. Do not, under any circumstances, back down now. You call that shark of a lawyer you hired, you tell her everything, and you let her do her job. You are not a monster. You are a survivor who is finally fighting back." I hung up the phone feeling like I had just been given a shot of adrenaline to the heart. Brenda hadn't coddled me. She hadn't offered platitudes. She had handed me back my sword and told me to use it. That evening, Robert sat down with me at the computer. He had been quietly working in the background, doing his own methodical, engineering-style analysis of the situation. "Okay, look at this," he said, pulling up Vanessa's Facebook page on his laptop. He pointed to the comments on her post, the ones that had wounded me so deeply. I did a little digging, he said, a grim smile on his face. I spent the afternoon on the phone. See this woman, Cheryl, the one that said, "You are so strong, V"? She's the wife of the guy Greg owes $5,000 to from that poker game last year. I called his husband. He confirmed it. They're hoping you'll cave so they can get paid. He pointed to another name. See this guy, Mark? He and Greg were partners in that can't-miss real estate scheme that went bust. He lost his shirt. He's probably hoping for a piece of the action, too. And this one, and this one. He went down the list. A significant portion of the most vocal, sympathetic supporters were people from Greg's seedy circle of gamblers and failed entrepreneurs, people who likely had a vested financial interest in seeing Vanessa get her hands on my money. They weren't a crowd of my peers. They were a cheering section of co-conspirators. They are not a crowd, Martha. They're a choir, and Greg is the choir director. The rest are just casual observers who will forget about this by next week when there's a new piece of neighborhood gossip. Seeing it laid out like that, so logically, was profoundly calming. The shame that had clung to me like a shroud began to dissipate, replaced with a renewed, colder anger. They had tried to isolate me, to make me feel crazy and alone. It had almost worked, but they had failed. I had Robert, my rock, I had Brenda, my fierce defender, and I had Margaret Summers, my legal champion. I was not alone. The next morning, my hand steady, my voice clear, I called Margaret's office. I forwarded her the screenshots of the Facebook post and the list of names and connections Robert had compiled. I recounted the incident with Greg in the street, giving the names of the neighbors who had been present. Margaret was silent for a moment after I finished. I expected her to be angry or frustrated. Instead, her voice held a note of grim, chilling satisfaction. "Thank you, Martha. This is excellent," she said. "Excellent?" I asked, confused. "They're slandering me all over town." "Yes," she said, and I could almost hear the smile in her voice. "They are. Publicly. And in doing so, they are destroying any claim they might have had to being rational, concerned family members. They are proving our entire case for us. They think they're fighting a public relations war, but they are actually just handing us evidence for a legal one. This changes things. It's time to stop being reactive. It's time to set the trap." A shiver went down my spine, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from anticipation. The siege was about to be broken. The hunter was about to be hunted. "A trap?" I repeated. The word felt foreign and sharp on my tongue. I was a retired school administrator. I set up parent-teacher conferences and detention schedules, not elaborate legal traps. "Precisely." Margaret's voice was crisp and decisive over the phone. "So far, we've been on the defensive, reacting to their moves. The restraining order is ready to be filed and served, but I want to do it under circumstances that give us maximum leverage and shut down any possibility of them challenging it. Their little smear campaign has given us the perfect opportunity. They've shown they're willing to lie publicly. Now we get them to lie professionally, on the record." The plan she laid out was audacious, simple in its concept, and utterly terrifying in its execution. I'm going to call Vanessa and Greg. I will introduce myself as your legal counsel, but I will frame it as a gesture of goodwill. I will tell them that you are deeply hurt by the current family rift and that you've retained me not as an aggressor, but as a neutral third party to help find a path forward. I will invite them to my office for a formal mediation session.
My heart hammered against my ribs. The thought of being in the same room with them again made my stomach churn with acid. "They'll never come," I said, my voice a weak whisper. "They'll be suspicious." "Oh, they'll come," Margaret said, with a chilling confidence that was both frightening and reassuring. "People like them, Martha, are fundamentally arrogant. They believe they are smarter than everyone else in the room. They've been able to manipulate you for years, and they'll assume they can manipulate me too. They will see this not as a trap, but as a stage. It's a chance to perform their victimhood act in front of your lawyer.
hoping to win me over or perhaps intimidate me into telling you to back down. They won't be able to resist the opportunity to be the center of attention. The plan was brilliant, but the thought of facing them, of hearing their lies directed at my face, was daunting. "What do I have to do?" I asked, my voice small. "Your role is the hardest," Margaret said, and her voice softened slightly, a rare crack in her professional armor. "You have to sit there, next to me, and you have to be silent. Utterly silent. No matter what they say, no matter how outrageous their lies or how deeply they insult you, you do not react. You don't cry. You don't get angry. You don't defend yourself. You will be a stone wall, a gray rock. You will let them talk. You will let them hang themselves with their own words. Can you do that for me, Martha? Can you do that for yourself?" I thought of the shattered plate. I thought of the snake in the box. I thought of the pitying looks from my neighbors. I thought of the innocent faces of Lily and Noah. "Yes," I said, a new hardness in my voice that surprised even me. "I can do that." The next few days were spent in careful preparation, like actors rehearsing for a play. Margaret coached me over the phone. We went over the process, the sequence of events. The meeting would be held in her largest conference room, a space designed to intimidate. It would be officially recorded, a fact she would disclose at the very beginning, framing it as standard practice for mediation to ensure accuracy for all parties. A certified court stenographer would also be present, introduced simply as her administrative assistant who would be taking notes. "They'll feel important," Margaret explained, her strategic mind whirring. "Like their words are being taken so seriously they require a formal record. It will encourage them to talk more, not less." I spent the night before the meeting in a state of high anxiety, sleep an impossible luxury. I tossed and turned, their imagined accusations echoing in my head. Robert, sensing my turmoil, got out of bed and made me chamomile tea. We sat in the dark kitchen, the silence a comfortable blanket. "You're the strongest person I know," he said, breaking the quiet. "You've been preparing for this for months. You've got this." The morning of the mediation, I dressed carefully, as if for battle. I chose a simple, tailored navy blue dress. It was conservative, professional, the kind of thing I used to wear to school board meetings. I didn't want to look like a victim, but I also didn't want to look aggressive. I wanted to look like what I was, a reasonable, composed woman who had been pushed to her absolute limit. I put on a string of my mother's pearls, their cool weight against my skin, a reminder of a different kind of maternal strength. As Robert and I drove downtown, a strange calm settled over me. The fear was still there, a cold, hard knot in the pit of my stomach, but it was overlaid with a sense of purpose. This was the final act. Everything I had been working toward, everything I had endured would come to a head in that conference room. There was no turning back. We arrived early. Margaret met us in the lobby and led us into the conference room. It was an imposing space with a long, gleaming mahogany table that could seat 20 and a wall of windows overlooking the city skyline. The court stenographer, a quiet, unassuming woman named Jean, was already sat in the corner, her machine ready. Her presence made it all feel terribly real and official. Margaret placed a pitcher of ice water and some glasses on the table. "Just remember, Martha," she placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "You are not on trial here. They are. Let them perform. Give them enough rope and they will build their own gallows." We sat and waited. The minutes ticked by, each one stretching into an eternity. At precisely 10 a.m., the intercom on Margaret's desk buzzed. The receptionist's voice was cool and clear. "Miss Summers, Vanessa and Greg Wilson are here." My heart leapt into my throat. I smoothed down my dress, took a sip of water, and composed my features into a mask of neutral calm I did not feel. I focused on a painting on the far wall, a swirl of abstract blues and grays. The door opened, and they walked in. Vanessa was dressed in what she probably considered a power outfit: skin-tight black pants and a flashy, expensive-looking silk blouse. Her hair and makeup were perfect. She looked ready for a luncheon, not a legal mediation. Greg wore a suit that was slightly too tight across the shoulders, a smug, confident look on his face. They saw me sitting next to Margaret, and a flicker of surprise crossed Vanessa's face before she quickly replaced it with a look of pained martyrdom. They thought they were walking onto a stage where they were the stars. They had no idea they were walking into the dock. The trap was set, the bait was laid. All we had to do now was wait for them to step in it. "Vanessa, Greg, thank you for coming," Margaret began, her voice as smooth and polished as the table between us. She gestured to the chairs opposite us. "I'm Margaret Summers. Please, have a seat." They sat, arranging themselves with an air of theatrical gravity. Vanessa placed her designer handbag on the table with a soft, deliberate thud, a territorial marking. Greg straightened his tie, looking around the expensive office with a covetous gleam in his eye, already mentally spending my money. "As I mentioned on the phone," Margaret continued, her tone perfectly calibrated to sound reasonable and conciliatory, "your mother has retained my services to help navigate this difficult family situation. She is very hurt, and we are here today to open a line of communication. The goal of this mediation is to hear your concerns and see if we can find a path to reconciliation that works for everyone." She folded her hands on the table, the picture of a neutral arbiter. "Before we begin, for the sake of accuracy and to protect all parties, this meeting will be recorded. My assistant, Jean, will also be taking notes to ensure we have a clear record of our conversation. Is that agreeable to everyone?" Greg puffed out his chest, a self-important gesture that made him look like a pouter pigeon. "Of course, we have nothing to hide. In fact, we welcome the transparency." He shot a pointed look at me, a silent challenge. "See, we're the reasonable ones. We're not afraid of the truth." I remained silent, my eyes fixed on that abstract painting on the wall. I could feel their eyes on me, probing, trying to get a reaction, but I gave them nothing. I was a statue. I was a gray rock. My heart was hammering, but my hands, clasped in my lap, were steady. "Excellent," Margaret said with a small, encouraging smile. "Vanessa, why don't we start with you? In your own words, please tell me what has led us to this point. Help me understand your perspective." It was like opening a floodgate. Vanessa leaned forward, her eyes glistening with unshed crocodile tears, launching into a performance that was both breathtaking in its audacity and deeply, profoundly insulting. "Thank you, Margaret. It's just so hard. I love my mother, I really do, but she's changed. Over the last few years, she's become so obsessed with money. It's all she talks about, all she cares about. Our entire relationship has become transactional. Every conversation ends with her reminding me how much she's done for me, as if she's keeping a running tally."
"We've been struggling," Vanessa went on, dabbing at a non-existent tear with a perfectly manicured fingertip. "The economy is tough. Greg is between jobs right now, but he's up for a huge promotion at a new firm, a real game changer for us. We just needed a little help, a little support to bridge the gap. Not a handout, a loan. But when we asked her, she treated us like criminals, like we were trying to steal from her. She became cold, distant, accusatory." Her voice grew stronger, filled with a righteous indignation that was chillingly convincing. "She's always been controlling, if I'm being honest, using money to make us do what she wants. But now that she's getting older, it's worse. She's paranoid. She's forgetful. She accused me of stealing from her. It's insane. We're worried she's not capable of managing her own affairs anymore." Greg jumped in on cue, playing the role of the concerned, protective husband to perfection.
"We're worried about her, honestly," he said, his brow furrowed with a look of deep, fake concern. "She's not thinking clearly. She's listening to my wife's father, who, no offense, has always been a bit tight with money, and she's making these rash, impulsive decisions. We believe she needs a medical evaluation. We're just trying to protect her from herself and to protect the family assets from being, you know, wasted on bad decisions or, God forbid, some kind of scam artist." They were weaving a compelling, insidious narrative. The concerned children worried about their aging, mentally unstable mother. Without my journal, without my evidence, it would have been a classic, tragic case of he said, she said. They were laying the groundwork to have me declared incompetent. Margaret just nodded slowly, her face a perfect mask of professional empathy. "I see. So, your concern is primarily for your mother's well-being and the preservation of the family estate for future generations." "Exactly," Vanessa said, a wave of relief washing over her face. She clearly thought Margaret was on her side. "We're not greedy. We just think the inheritance should be used to help the family while we're all here to enjoy it, not hoarded in a bank account until after, you know." Greg leaned forward, lowering his voice conspiratorially, as if sharing a secret with a new ally. "We know she's not getting any younger. We think it's only fair that we have some oversight, some input, for her own good. The last thing anyone wants is a messy situation after the funeral because things weren't handled properly beforehand." There it was again, the casual, chilling reference to my death. But this time, it wasn't just a threat whispered in my dining room. It was a statement made on the record in front of a lawyer and a court stenographer, a clear statement of their motives. Margaret turned her calm, steady gaze on me. "Martha, do you have anything to say in response to these very serious concerns?" This was my test. The urge to scream, to leap across the table and throw their lies back in their faces was immense. The injustice was a physical thing, a hot bile rising in my throat. But I remembered my promise. I met Margaret's eyes for a fraction of a second, and then I looked at my daughter. I saw the triumphant, smug look on her face. She thought she had won. She thought she had successfully painted me into a corner. I took a slow, deliberate breath, letting it fill my lungs. "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm, carrying across the silent room. A flicker of confusion crossed Vanessa's face. Greg frowned. My silence was not the reaction they had expected. It unnerved them. They were expecting tears or anger, a hysterical outburst that would prove their point about my instability. My calm was a weapon they didn't know how to fight. Margaret nodded slowly, as if accepting my decision. "All right, then." She paused, letting the silence stretch for a beat too long, skillfully shifting the power in the room. "You mentioned, Vanessa, that your mother accused you of stealing. Can you give me an example of what she might be referring to? What were these little things on the credit card?" "Oh, it's ridiculous," Vanessa said with an airy wave of her hand. "A few charges here and there. I was an authorized user. She got upset about a charge from a pet store, of all things. A pet store." "I see," Margaret said, her expression unreadable. "And what about this prank you mentioned to your aunt, the one with the snake?" Greg laughed, a short, ugly bark that sounded more like a cough. "Oh, that. It was a stupid joke that got blown way out of proportion. A rubber snake in a box for Mother's Day. A gag gift. We thought she'd have a laugh. Instead, she called the police. It just proves our point about her not being stable. Who calls 911 over a rubber snake?" They had done it. They had lied about the finances, they had lied about their motives, and now they had just lied about a police report on the record with a court stenographer documenting every syllable. They had confidently and arrogantly walked straight into the center of the trap. The performance was over. It was time to bring down the curtain. Margaret let Greg's lie about the rubber snake hang in the air for a moment, letting the echo of his forced laughter fade into the heavy silence of the conference room. She looked at him, then at Vanessa, and then she offered them a thin, professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was the smile of a predator that knows the hunt is over. "Thank you," she said, her voice suddenly losing all its warmth and becoming as cold and sharp as surgical steel. "You've been very candid. I appreciate your honesty. Everything you've said has been duly noted." She subtly gestured with her head toward Jean, the stenographer in the corner, whose fingers had been flying silently and relentlessly across her machine for the last hour. For the first time, Vanessa and Greg seemed to actually notice her, not as a piece of office furniture, but as a person who had been recording their every word. A flicker of genuine unease crossed Vanessa's face. The atmosphere in the room had shifted, instantly and irrevocably. The air grew thick and cold. Margaret reached into her sleek leather portfolio in front of her. With a slow, deliberate movement, she slid 3 documents across the gleaming table. They stopped directly in front of Vanessa and Greg. The first was a crystal-clear copy of the official police report for Mother's Day. The words live animal and corn snake were clearly visible in the officer's neat block printing. The second was the screenshot of my credit card statement with the $79.99 charge from Reptile Palace highlighted in a furious shade of yellow. And the third, and most damning, was a crisp, notarized affidavit from the owner of Reptile Palace, a man named Stan, confirming the sale of 1 live corn snake to a customer using my credit card number, a transaction he remembered because the buyer had asked for it to be shipped in an unmarked box. "A rubber snake, you said?" Margaret asked, her voice dangerously quiet, each word a perfectly aimed dart. "That's interesting, because the city police department, Visa, and a man named Stan, who runs a shop called Reptile Palace, all seem to be under a different impression. Lying to an officer of the court during a recorded mediation is called perjury, Greg. It's a felony. It carries serious consequences." The color drained from Greg's face. He looked like he'd been punched in the gut, all the air knocked out of him. He stared at the papers, his mouth opening and closing silently like a fish out of water. Vanessa's carefully applied tan couldn't hide the sickly, greenish pallor that washed over her skin. The smug confidence had vanished, replaced by sheer animal panic. "Now, let's address your other concerns," she continued, her voice relentless, giving them no time to recover. She pulled out another document from her portfolio. "You mentioned your worry about your mother's mental state and her financial decisions. I agree that her decisions have changed. For instance, this is a copy of a permanent restraining order which was signed by a judge this morning based on the evidence I submitted yesterday. It will be served to you by a court-martial as you leave this building."
She slid it across the table. It landed with a soft, final thud. My name as the petitioner, their names as the respondents. The legal language was brutal and final. It forbade them from coming within 500 feet of me, my home, or my vehicle. It forbade any form of contact, phone, email, text, or third-party communication. It was a legal wall. "As for your concern about the family assets," Margaret went on, her voice like ice, "you'll be pleased to know they are now fully and permanently protected." She produced the final document. It wasn't the full, lengthy trust agreement, but a 1-page summary, clear and concise, drafted specifically for this moment of impact. "My client has established an irrevocable trust for all of her assets. As the term irrevocable implies, its terms cannot be changed. Not by her, not by you, not by any court.
You are not named as beneficiaries. Vanessa finally found her voice. It was a strangled gasp, a sound of pure disbelief. What? No, she can't do that. That's our money! Actually, it's her money, Margaret corrected her calmly. And oh, she can. And she has. But, she added, twisting the knife with the final virtuous turn, she did share your concern for Lily and Noah's future, which is why she has also established a separate, fully funded educational trust, what some might call a college fund, for each of them. The funds are managed by an independent corporate financial trustee and can only be used for tuition, books, and verified educational expenses. You will never have access to or control over that money. Your financial incentive to harass, intimidate, or otherwise interfere in your mother's life, as you have so helpfully demonstrated in this room today, has been legally and permanently terminated. It was a systematic, legal annihilation of their very hope and scheme. Every lie they had told in that room had been expertly and cruelly dismantled with a corresponding piece of irrefutable evidence. Vanessa turned to me, her eyes wild with a mixture of hatred and desperation. The mask of the perfect daughter was gone, ripped away to reveal the snarling, entitled creature beneath. "How could you do this to me?" she shrieked, her voice echoing in the silent, sunlit room. "After everything I've done for you, I'm your daughter!" I remembered my promise to Margaret, my promise to myself. I looked at my daughter, the stranger sitting across from me, and for the first time, I felt nothing. No pain, no anger, not even pity. Just a vast, quiet emptiness. The place in my heart that had been reserved for her, the one she had chipped away at for years, was now a closed, locked door. I met her gaze, held it for a long moment, and then I turned to my lawyer, my champion. "Margaret," I said, my voice clear and steady, a voice I hadn't heard from myself for years, "I believe we are done here." Those 6 words were my victory speech. They were the sound of my freedom. Vanessa let out a sob of pure impotent rage. Greg just sat there, stunned and broken, the architect of his own demise, staring at the papers that represented the end of his free ride. Margaret stood up, a queen surveying her conquered territory. "I believe you're right, Martha. The mediation is concluded." She nodded curtly to the door. "You can see yourselves out." They stumbled out of the room, not with a bang, but with a whimper. The checkmate was complete. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't screamed or cried. I had won, not with emotion, but with preparation, intelligence, and the cold, hard, and undeniable power of the truth. I took a deep breath, the first truly free breath I had taken in years, and I let it out slowly, the tension of decades finally leaving my body. The weeks that followed the confrontation at Margaret's office were quiet. Eerily, unnervingly quiet. The restraining order was served by a grim-faced court-martial in the lobby of the law firm, a final public humiliation for them. The angry phone calls stopped. The manipulative text messages ceased. The public smear campaign on Facebook vanished overnight, the post deleted, as if it had never existed. It was as if a constant, high-pitched whine that I had grown so accustomed to that it had become the soundtrack of my life had suddenly been silenced. The silence was deafening, and at first it was unsettling. Peace, I learned, takes some getting used to. There was no gloating, no sense of triumphant revenge. Victory, I discovered, was a much more somber and complicated affair. Robert and I changed the locks on our doors, a final symbolic act of securing our fortress. As I heard the new key turn in the lock with a solid, satisfying click, I didn't feel joy. I felt a profound and weary sense of relief. The war was over. The cost was my only child. The first few months were about finding our new normal, a life not defined by crisis management. Robert and I started taking those evening walks again, but now there was no fear of ambush, no dread of what lay around the corner. We talked about things other than Vanessa. We talked about books, about politics, about the ridiculously overgrown zucchini in our garden. We pulled out old travel brushers and started planning a trip to the national parks, a trip we had put off for years because we always needed to keep a substantial emergency fund available for our daughter's next self-inflicted disaster. We were reclaiming our lives, piece by piece, conversation by conversation. But a ghost haunted our quiet home. Sometimes I would walk past the spare room, which had once been Vanessa's bedroom, still decorated with the faded posters of bands she loved in high school, and a wave of sadness so intense would wash over me that I'd have to grip the doorframe for support. I grieved for the daughter I had lost, not the 42-year-old stranger who had sent me a snake, but the little girl with scraped knees and a tangled ponytail who used to think I was the center of her universe. I grieved for the relationship I thought we had, the one I had poured so much of myself into, only to discover it was built on a foundation of sand. I grieved for the grandmother I was supposed to be, the one who baked cookies and attended school plays, not the one who communicated through a lawyer. Margaret had arranged a way for me to maintain a sterile, safe contact with my grandchildren without violating the restraining order. Once a month, I could send a package to her office, which she would then forward to the kids. And they could send things back to me the same way. It was a cold, mediated connection, a relationship conducted through a legal airlock, but it was better than nothing. It was the only way to love them without being destroyed. About 6 months after the final meeting, a small padded envelope with Margaret's crisp return address arrived. Inside was a drawing from Lily. It was a picture of me and Robert rendered in the charming, clumsy way of an 8-year-old. We were holding hands in a garden under a giant, smiling sun. At the bottom, in wobbly, earnest letters, she had written, "I miss you, Grandma. I hope you are not sad. Love, Lily." I held the drawing to my chest and cried. They were not tears of anger or pain, but tears of a complicated, bittersweet love. The connection was still there. The love was still there. It had been severed from the toxic channel of their parents and was now finding a new, healthier path to reach me. It was enough. For now. It had to be enough. Today, my life is peaceful. It's a quiet life filled with small, precious joys. The satisfaction of pulling a weed and seeing a flower thrive. The warmth of Robert's hand in mine as we watch the evening news. The taste of coffee on a crisp autumn morning. The peace was not free. It was the most expensive thing I have ever owned, purchased at the cost of a part of my own heart. But it is mine. I own it outright. I often sit in my garden looking at the roses Robert planted for me. As I prune away the dead branches and the suckers that drain the life from the main stem, I think about my journey. I realize that for years I had been watering a dying plant, pouring my love, my energy, and my resources into a relationship that was rotten at the root. I thought my silence, my patience, my endless giving was a form of love, but I learned that it wasn't. It was enablement. It was fear. Love cannot exist in a climate of fear and disrespect. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and even for the person hurting you is to build a wall. Not to be cruel, but to protect what is sacred. To stop the spread of the disease. My silence now is not the silence of a victim. It is the silence of a sanctuary. I learned that my value as a woman, as a mother, is not determined by how much I can give away, but by the respect I command for myself. I learned that setting a boundary is not